Hi, welcome back. We are here again. We're back, and this is episode 3 of Let's Talk About It. And today we are talking about getting to know yourself. And more specifically, we are having a deep conversation that I have been wanting to have for the longest time. Okay, so before I tell you what we're talking about, more specifically, I am going to give you the backstory. So if you have been watching, if you've been with the last 2 episodes, you know that I have a online community that I call Full Circle Wellness, the Full Circle Wellness community. It's a whole framework, it's a whole model. And for 8 weeks, we did a conversation on each of the 8 key factors of the Full Circle Wellness like pie of life that I have sort of put together and, like I keep saying, like birthed out of my own healing journey, right? And there were 6 videos. We did conversations on personal development, mental health, joy and leisure, like having fun, purpose and work. We talked about finances. Those conversations were combined in one video because there were just 6 of the 8. Anyway, and we did fitness and nutrition. And then we had a conversation on, we did mental health, personal development. Why am I missing one, you guys? This is like my own thing and I'm missing one. Either way, when we had our conversation on mental health, I was like, I talked about my mental health journey and like where I started and how I went there and like the modalities of therapy that I used and that my therapist used with me, things like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and IFS, which is internal family systems. It's a psychological tool, a modality of therapy. It's like a type of meditation, and that is what we're talking about today. When we had those conversations a couple of weeks ago, I kept saying like I really want to do a deep dive, guys, on internal family systems. This modality of therapy helped me so tremendously that I was like, I have to talk about this in great detail because I know that this is something that a lot of people can really relate to and really utilize. And I was just like, God, I just want to have a conversation, guys. Let's have a conversation. I'll be back. We're going to have a conversation. And now today, in light of the sort of conversation on getting to know yourself, we are going to do a deep dive on internal family systems. And I'm so excited, guys. I'm so excited that you're here. I'm so excited that we're back for another week. We're in the studio. We are still on my phone. I actually just tried to hook up like all of my stuff that Boo gave me, the microphone and the webcam and everything. And it's fine because the webcam actually hooks up to the tripod, which is really cool. So I can still kind of get some nice distance and figure out a set situation. As you can see, we're still on the floor. Gotta get a nice, I want to get like a fancy chair, like right here where we are. I just want to get like a fancy chair and then just sort of zoom this out because there's a lot of really cool art on the wall. Anyway, it's gonna take time, guys. It's gonna take time, but thank you for being back here with me and hanging in to my like Scrappy-Doo Nation video podcast that we're doing here. And I'm just excited to be back and I'm so excited to have this conversation. But before we dive in super deep, I do have like a couple of other things I want to touch on in terms of just like getting to know yourself and kind of like the fun of that. And the reason this is such a big conversation, you guys. So in my own healing journey, like when I really started things out and I went back, there was a lot of just like, who am I? Like, what do I even like what do I even want to do with my life? Like there's a lot of things that go into understanding beyond just like, oh, I like cheeseburgers and not pizza, or like, you know what I mean, like just, oh, I like the color orange but not the color blue, or like whatever. I like all colors, but that's just because I'm super into the arts, and any shade of any color I'll get excited about. I came in hot tonight with a nice pretty shiny teal headband with lots of glitter and rhinestones because I love to sparkle. And I actually got this last night, no joke, from I had a Galentine's party, like a sort of belated Galentine's party with my besties, and this was like a prize that I got from playing a game, and we love games, and it was just such a blast. And I love chilling with my girlfriends, and I love that we do that with each other because it's so much fun just to like get into like one of the like not I mean, I guess Valentine's Day is kind of big in terms of like it's a Hallmark thing, but like me and Boo have never been huge on Valentine's. Very recently I started kind of like just getting him stuff like over the years, like let's just do like a little gift exchange, and like nothing crazy. Like this year I just got us a new duvet cover. Like that's hardly a gift for him. That's like a both of us gift. You know what I mean? But it's like really fun that I do this with my girlfriends. Anyway, thinking about stuff like your favorite, right? Like Valentine's Day is not my favorite holiday. Actually, Halloween is my favorite holiday. And I also very much love Christmas. Just the whole like latter half of the year is totally my jam. I love the fall. I love the winter. Like it's like understanding like, okay, that those are the things that I like, but then taking it a level further and thinking like, why is it that I like those things? Like what about that time of year is like hitting me somewhere in here? And I think that is like a deeper level of understanding of yourself. Like I like that time of the year because my birthday is in September. It always reminded me of like back to school, and I love a fresh start. I always just got really into like getting new school supplies and like starting to learn something new. I've always just been a voracious learner. Like I love to just like get into academia, and like the start of a school year was always like, and so I always have those vibes at that time of the year. And then of course, you know, we're going into like Halloween and Thanksgiving and all the decorations, everything starts to like slow down. But at the same time, I get this feeling of like start. Like it's like instead of shutting down for the winter, like most of the world kind of starts to do, I get a vibe of like, okay, it's time to like, yes, I'm nesting. Yes, I'm coming in. It's getting cold. I'm like, not outside as much. We're not doing kind of like the stuff we would do in the summer, but I just get so excited about like, let's pick out some new stuff to learn. Like I said, just love to learn. I love to read. I'm always reading something, but like around that time of the year, I'll literally sort of replicate the like school process and just like, okay, let's pick a thing to learn. And like, if it's a language, or I'll take a course on something, or I'll just dive into, I don't care. Like I'll just dive into something. And that's just like something that I didn't necessarily understand about myself until I started doing like internal work and stuff like that. And there's a ton of like way more fun stuff too that I think you can do when it comes to like getting to know yourself. And in the community this week, I'm going to be talking about this and sharing a lot of these like quizzes. Everybody, I love a quiz. I'm sure, I don't know, do you love a quiz? I love a quiz. I'm going to be going into like things like the Enneagram and the like Myers-Briggs quizzes and like your Harry Potter house. If you see my little guy over here on the shelf. So I have like a whole little fandom bookcase going on, like yes, books, but this whole middle shelf here is just like Harry Potter stuff. I grew up with it. I love it. I am in House Ravenclaw. As you can see, I have one of those little squishmallows, and it's a Ravenclaw squishmallow. Stuff like that. And I think that there's so much more to that. Like even though that's fun and it's like, yeah, your Harry Potter house, and like not everybody's into Harry Potter. I grew up with that. It's just something I'm into, but it's like having those things and then understanding like why. Again, I talked about like I love to learn and like read, and it's like that's what makes me kind of like that Ravenclaw. That's like where that comes from, like just being that person that's like academic and all of that stuff. And then I want to dive into things like, I think another one that's actually really, really good, and I think a lot of workplaces use this one if you're trying to do like team building and like identifying yourself, but the Enneagram numbers, so clutch if you want to gain some serious like insight on yourself. My Enneagram number is 4. I am a solid Enneagram 4. That one is the individualist. I am driven by essentially a need to be different. Like it sounds kind of like, honestly, it sounds a little narcissistic, but it isn't, I promise. I've asked my therapist if I was a narcissist, and she was like, a narcissist would not ask if they were a narcissist. I was like, okay, well, that's good to know. But I like am totally driven by like being weird. Like I don't give a shit that I'm weird. I want to be the weird one in the room. Like I love that. I like being a little bit eclectic, the artsy kid. Like I strive to like be myself and like set a precedence for being myself and just showing up in like an authentic and genuine way, in the hope that that sort of like spreads and permeates to the people around me. Because I feel like when you show up authentically, you are essentially giving permission to the people around you to do the exact same thing. And I think when we all show up in an authentic way, that makes the world just like such a like juicy place to be, like just to like have all these different personalities and different types of people around you. And that's kind of like what the individualist Enneagram number is all about. Just like setting the tone of like being different, being an individualist. And that was like when I found that out. And like there's so much more to it. Like when you do those quizzes, you can find out like these are the kind of things that might like trigger an individualist. These are the kinds of things that a healthy individualist will do. An unhealthy individualist will look like this. Like, these are the negative aspects of being that way. Something that's negative about that can be like being a perfectionist and wanting to show up like perfectly and like do all of the things in a perfect way. And that can really, honestly, perfectionism is not healthy. Like, that can really set you back, and no matter who you are, like, you don't have to be an Enneagram 4 to like fall into the trap of perfectionism. But like, when you go into doing those kinds of quizzes, it usually gives you a lot of details on like the personality type and stuff like that, or something like a Myers-Briggs. I think most people know what that one is. It's the one where you're either introverted or extroverted. So it's like I or E, and then N or like F, T or P. Like, so you have like ENFJ or INTJ or ESFP. Like, you're either like sensing or intuition, perceiving or judging, introverted or extroverted, like thinking or feeling. Like, those are the 4 like slots. And typically, I think if you look at that, feel like you know yourself well enough, you can kind of identify like, okay, yeah, I'm more introverted than extroverted. I'm more, I base the world around more like my intuition over like the things that I sense, like with my 5 senses, the things that I take in. And then like thinking over feeling. Like, are you more logical, or are you more feeling based? And then are you more of a perceiving person, like you just kind of observe, or are you more of a judger, like you actually pass kind of like judgments on the things that you see? So mine, it's funny because like I used to be an E. I used to show up as an E all the time because I was considering myself kind of like very extroverted. I used to go out a lot, like when I was younger, always with crowds of friends and stuff like that. But as I've gotten older, it just to come back home and like be with myself, like that gives me more energy, and that's like how I have to energize myself instead of like being out with friends. And I love being out with friends. I am like good at, being an extrovert and like engaging with people. I can do that. I'm pretty like 60-40 on that scale actually, but I'm more of an introvert, which was like, oh, interesting. Like, okay, I've become more of an introvert over the years. So mine is INFJ. So introvert, intuition, feeling, judging, which I'm judging my judgment because I'm like, I don't want to be a judger. I hate when people are judgy. And actually the thing is, I'm really not judging. Like, whatever you've got going on, like I have no judgment. Like, I'm not passing judgment on the things that you like. I'm never gonna like yuck somebody's yum. I am just not that person. But I think in terms of like processing something or reviewing something, it's like the judgment is that like you're making discernments about things like as you observe the world around you, and you're kind of like, oh, that's not for me, that is for me. And I think that's more about what the like J is, the like judging aspect of a person, as opposed to just like a perceiver. I'm less of a like perceptionist and more of like a judgmentalist. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be a judgy person. Because I actually just got through reading this book called Judgment Detox by Gabrielle Bernstein. Totally recommend it. Love it. It's kind of workbook style. Like, each chapter builds upon the next, and you kind of like work with yourself and your judgments as you go through the book. So good. Like, it's got a lot of meditations, lots of prayer, like lots of journaling. Definitely recommend. But that's one of those things. It's like you learn to understand that about yourself so that you can then say like, ooh, I don't necessarily like that thing about myself. Let me see if I can work on that. When you have a deeper understanding of yourself, you can make those discernments. You can say like, ooh, I am a little bit judgy. Like, I don't want to be judgy. Let me do something to mitigate that or to change as a person. I think that's so important that we like learn about ourselves, truly, truly know ourselves so that we can show up for ourselves, show up better for others, explain ourselves better to others, communicate better with other people. And if we don't like something about ourselves, change, like learn to make a change. Like, that is not, there's nothing wrong with, I think, changing. I think it's important to change and grow, especially if you're trying to correct flaws. And it's like, I don't want to say flat out flaws, but it's like we all have flaws, right? Like, and what we're going to dive into with IFS is like triggers, like especially if you have emotional triggers and then you show up in a way based on that trigger, that's something that's worth like observing the introspection that you need to take there and then like making those changes to become a better person. And I think that's part of why we're here, guys. Like, that's part of life. Like, we're just supposed to grow and like get better. And then of course, you know, you have fun stuff like, oh, like I'm a Virgo, you guys, like I'm super Virgo. I like my sun is in Virgo, my moon is in Virgo, my Mars and my Venus were all in Virgo when I was born. So I'm like super freaking Virgo. But then my rising sign is a Scorpio. So it's like just like fun stuff like that. I know like a lot of people aren't totally into the horoscopes or the zodiac or whatever, but I love it as just like one other layer of like how you can explain yourself to somebody. And then again, like fun stuff like your Harry Potter house, or like what would your faction be from like what was the book series Divergent. Like, would you be Divergent, or would you be like Amity or Erudite or like whatever? Like that kind of stuff is fun. And then of course things like your love language, like being able to explain to somebody like how you like to give and receive love is so crucial in developing relationships, and not just like partner relationships, but like friendships as well. Like one of my very best friends, her love language is gift giving. She is an incredible gift giver. And it's like, that's not my love language at all. Like when I go to give gifts for people, I'm like, oh my God, like what do I get? Like I'm so generic. Sometimes I can come up with something cool, but sometimes it's just like, oh, okay, like here's a candle. Like, I don't know. Like it's just not my love language. And then she, on the other hand, is so good at discerning like the core of like who you are and then gifting you something based on that. It's absolutely beautiful. But like my love language is quality time spent. I love to just show up and be super present with my people, hanging out last night with my girlfriends, just being 100% in that, engaging, making memories, having experiences. That's how I love to love other people. That's how I love to be loved. Like I want you to give me your full undivided attention if we are like spending time. Get off your phone, unless we're like, you know, of course you're like, oh, I did this thing and let me show you this picture, or like let me look up this thing that I was, you know what I mean? Because of course our phones are like little computers in our pocket. So if you're talking about something and it's worth it to like look it up and share it, that's fair. But like don't sit there and scroll while we're together. That is not, I will call you out on that so fast. Like get the hell off your phone, engage with me. I don't want to see the videos on your TikTok. Like let's have a real fucking conversation. And that's how I show up for other people too. Like I want to be present with you. And it's also how I love myself. That's important. How do you like to love yourself? Again, quality time spent. I will take myself on, like, as Julia Cameron says, the author Julia Cameron, I'll take myself out on an artist date. We'll go, we being like me and like little me. Again, IFS, we're going to dive. I'm just like, we're leading into that. I had some other stuff I wanted to like pile on top of the IFS conversation. Like I'll go to the art museum, or I'll take myself out to dinner. I will go get a movie, like go to the bookstore, do a shopping trip, like whatever. I do love to like gift myself stuff. I'm not gonna lie, I love to shop. It's just like, just something that I like. But it's like understanding that about yourself and then being able to explain that to other people. Like I think my partner's love language, he is kind of a physical touch person, but he's also an acts of service person. Like he wants to show love by taking out the trash, or like, hey babe, I did the dishes. Like, oh, thank you so much. Like, okay, but like I'm a quality time person. Can we sit here and watch a TV? Like, can we watch TV together? Like, I just like want to do, you know what I mean? So it's like, but being able to compromise and exchange those love languages with somebody and explain like how I like to be loved. Because the thing is, with your love language, like if his love language was gift giving, for instance, and he was constantly like giving me gifts, I wouldn't necessarily understand that as love, because that's not how I expect to receive love. Like that's not how I want to receive love. I want to receive it in the form of quality time. And for him, it's like physical touch. So I have to be cognizant of like, okay, let me hold your hand, let me touch you, let me cuddle, like just doing things like that. Like he's more of a physical touch person. And it's funny because I'm actually really not. I'm very much like a cat. Like my spirit animal is almost always some kind of like large cat, and I'm kind of cat-like. Like I'm like, don't fucking touch me. Like only touch me when I want to be touched. I don't like water. I love to sleep. Like I'm very much like cat-like. So when it comes to physical touch, I have to like think about that. Like, okay, I gotta be cuddly. Like I'm so cat-like. So just understanding those things about yourself. And this week, if you are not in the Full Circle Wellness community, I'm going to be sharing links to a lot of those quizzes, because that shit is so fun, guys. And I'm really wanting to see some engagement. I'm hoping everybody's going to be able to like dive into that and have some fun with it and like take those quizzes and share and just open up and have a larger conversation on like who we are, like what do we like, who are we, right? It's good. So that takes us into our conversation on internal family systems, I think, because I find internal family systems to be one of the deepest ways to know and understand yourself. So let's just dive right in. Okay, let's begin. So IFS, internal family systems, is a modality of therapy. It's a tool, it's like a psychotherapeutic tool for understanding who you are completely on the inside. It was coined by Dr. Richard Schwartz in the 1980s, and it is sort of, it posits that like we are not just a mono mind. We're not just like one person inside, and it's not, that sounds like multiple personalities, but multiple personality is like, that's a psychosis. That's like when you have multiple personalities showing up, you don't recognize that you have become essentially another person. Although multiple personalities do also stem from trauma, IFS is more of like a meditative tool that you can use to understand why you show up the way that you do in certain situations and actually heal through trauma or things that you've experienced, whether that's trauma with a big T or trauma with like a little t. And it's interesting to say that because whatever kind of trauma you've had, maybe it could have just been bullying, or it could have been something with parents. It could have been like a single event, like whatever it is. It's actually kind of up to you to determine whether that was like quote unquote big T trauma or like little t trauma. But either way, IFS is a really good tool to use to work through trauma. And that's exactly what my therapist did with me. We started with EMDR because there was a lot of stuff that I really needed to like physically release out of my body before I could even start to use something like a tool like IFS. But once you get there, it's this idea that there are, like, everyone has wounded parts that are called exiles in IFS therapy, and everyone has protective parts that are literally just called protectors. And there are managers and firefighters. Those are like the two types of protectors within the IFS system. IFS, again, being your internal family system. So when you have all of these parts, and some people have a lot, some people have a few. I actually ended up finding that I have like a lot of parts working in, and I'm going to share them with you. So I'm going to get really vulnerable with you guys and let you in, like literally in to my mind and my psyche, because I think that's going to be the best way for me to explain a lot of these concepts, is just to walk you through how that showed up for me. So in the beginning with my therapeutic journey, I was identifying that I had a lot of childhood trauma. And I'm not going to dive too deep into that because that is not my story alone. That is also the story of my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather and his mother. Like, this is like generational. It's a generational trauma. So I'm not going to get super, super deep into that because it's not only my story to share. But there was like a lot of traumatic, heightened emotions in my family. There was a lot of love in my home. I have no doubt that my mother loves me, and like, she's one of my best friends now, and we've done a lot of healing work. And I think a lot of that came from me starting that healing work, me saying like, okay, I'm gonna rid our family of this. This is heavy. I'm gonna be the one that says enough. And I think I've seen that like radiate throughout the rest of my family. And that is actually a super, super beautiful thing. So we're good now, but when I was a kid, we were not. Typically, you would have a lot of like, you know, mother drama, mother-daughter drama. But like the home that I grew up in, like I said, there was a lot of love, but there was also a lot of screaming. There was a lot of emotional dysregulation. It was just a lot of slamming cabinets, a lot of like, you don't know when there's going to be an outburst. And it turned me into somebody that would like shut down. Like, I ended up in what's called a freeze response most of the time, because as a child, you can't fight your parent. You can't flee your parent, although some people certainly do try. They try to run away from home and they do things like that. But it's like most of the time you end up either freezing or fawning. Fawning being like coming into the situation with people pleasing tendencies. Like, if I fawn my parent, then that will get them to stop or change or treat me differently. And my response was more of a freeze response. I often found myself just in my room doing my own thing, reading, playing a lot of video games, writing, making artwork, or just acting out scenes with my stuffed animals or with my dolls or things like that. Like I spent kind of a lot of time by myself. And if I wasn't doing that, then I did try to get my sort of sense of flee, where I would just go outside and hang out in the neighborhood with the kids and other kids my age. And like I was always like outside playing with my friends and stuff like that. But like home was not somewhere that I necessarily wanted to be, because home became someplace that was loud and it was uncertain. It didn't feel safe for me. And so it's funny to kind of talk about that now, because it's like I only see that in hindsight. But when you're in that, you don't necessarily recognize that there's a chronic trauma going on, that you are constantly in sort of like a survival state, that like, oh, if I come home from school today, I don't know what kind of mood my parents are going to be in. Are they going to be fighting, or is everything going to be kosher? And it sends very mixed signals to a child who internalizes that there's something wrong with them. Because when we're kids and shit's going on, you don't look at your parents and say like, what the fuck is wrong with these adults? You look at yourself and you say, what the fuck is wrong with me? And internalizing that at a super, super early age put me into a place where I didn't think that I was enough. I didn't think that I was lovable. I didn't feel safe. And it was like, oh, all of that just compounded and compounded and compounded. And as I went from being a preteen to a teen to an adult, it stayed with me, because I had no concept of like, there's trauma going on and parents are yelling at each other. And it's just like, this has nothing to do with me. It's like, no, I internalized that. And somewhere along the line, I eventually lost things like my confidence. I lost the ability to understand myself, because my whole life became about safety or fawning for, you know, a sense of safety. And then in hindsight, when I look back now, like I'm not saying this is like toot my own horn, but I'm a smart person and I tested well and like I got okay grades, but I never really like fully applied myself. And I think in hindsight, it's because I was just always stuck in this survival mode, and I had a lot of resentment for a long time, you guys. I felt like, damn it, like if that hadn't been my home life, could I have been more? Could I have been better? Could I have had better grades? Could I have gone to an Ivy? Like, could I have done all these things if I hadn't been stuck in like a survival mode as an adolescent? That's another story. But what that creates are what are called exiles within you. So that's the first part that we're going to talk about. Exiles being mostly children, yourself as a child. So it's like very early on, like 7 or 8 years old, I essentially abandoned who I was because I learned and internalized that who I was not okay. She was not worthy of anything. She was, not lovable, not enough in any capacity, too loud, like too much, like shut emotions down. And so I began to exile that part of myself. And of course, as this happens, right, you don't know that this is happening. This is something you end up dealing with as an adult with a therapist, like, oh, these exiled inner children. Okay, I get that now. Like, so I put that part of myself, I call her Little Leah. So this is the first part that I will introduce you to. Little Leah is sort of me at like the age of 6 or 7 years old. And I put her in a box. And I said, you're too much. You're too much, but also not enough. You're loud. No one wants to deal with you. And you're too emotional. So you need to go in a box. And when you put that version of yourself in a box, you immediately lose self. Self is the next sort of like part that we'll bring into the story. Self is literally the source of love within you. Self is you. Self is just itself. Like it's the God energy within you. It's the source of love within you. It is the agent of healing when it comes to internal family systems therapy. Self is who you want to get back to if you have parts that have like just dispersed. You've got exiles, you've got protectors, you've got firefighters. When you've broken yourself in that way, self is what you want to get back to as sort of like the leader of the internal family of all the other parts. Self has what Dr. Richard Schwartz explains as 8 C's of self. I had to write this down because I know I wasn't going to remember, but it's confidence, you're calm, clear, curious, connected, creative, compassionate. Wait, nope, that's 7. Confident, calm, connected, creative, compassionate, curious, clear. And those are like the embodiment of like being the self. So when you have that self energy, that's that healing energy within you. It's the source of like love within you that can't be touched. And that's the sort of like you that you want to get back to so that you can run and heal the rest of the family. Because what happens when you start to like put exiles in a box and you get what are called protectors that show up to then keep that exile in the box, because that's the trigger now. That feeling of I'm not enough, I'm too much, like I'm too emotional, I'm too loud, or whatever it is, I'm not lovable, that, or I'm not safe. That's another one that comes up for people a lot. Like I said, that came up for me a lot. Those are the things that exile now holds on to, and it becomes your trigger. That becomes your emotional trigger. So anytime as an adult you feel unsafe, or maybe it's like somebody made you feel stupid, or somebody made you feel ugly, or somebody made you feel unconfident, or somebody made you feel whatever the trigger is, the protectors come out and they say like, no, we are not going there. That has to stay in a box. Protectors tend to look like anger. They tend to look like violence. They tend to look like drinking. They tend to look like any kind of addiction, sex, video games, food, shopping, like gambling, whatever it is. They show up in that way to keep the exile in the box. So when you have protectors coming out like that, they're considered burdened. They're in an extreme role now. And they think, okay, I've got to protect this exile at all cost. So let me introduce you to a few of mine. After a while, I had a protector show up. And see, I can only speak about this in hindsight, because as I went through the meditative practice of doing this with my therapist, my therapist is a she would ask me like, how old is the exile? How old does the exile think that you are? How old is the protector? How old do they think the exile is? Like, they all relate to one another, like within your psyche. So for me, one of the first protectors that I had come up, I call her Demi. I shortened that for academic because she's the part of me that thinks that if I'm smart enough, or if I show up as a smart ass, or like a know-it-all, told you so bitch, that will keep my exile in a box and push, the world away from me and say like, no, don't, you know what? I'm better than you. I'm smarter than you. Know it all, bitch. Like, that's how she shows up. And she came out, I think, first. When I look back at sort of like who I became as a kid, I was constantly ready to like pop off, as they would say, or like give lip to my parents, because I didn't see them as trustworthy authority figures because of the arguing that I would see. It's like, you don't, like, again, this is not something you're processing in real time. But as a child, it's like, if your parents are constantly arguing and you've internalized that like, oh, I need to show up as a parent or something, you stop trusting them, and you're thinking, okay, well, I need to show up as an authority figure. So it's easy for a kid to suddenly become the kind of kid that pops off and says like, well, who are you to tell me what I know, or like what to do, or to clean my room, or that I'm grounded, or whatever. So you start to show up as kind of like a rebel. And it's like, well, I don't trust you, so like, why am I going to listen to anything that you have to say? And that became the sort of like first protector that came out. And when I did my meditative practice with my therapist, I envisioned that part of me as like 10, 11 years old, as this like smart know-it-all biatch. Like, and that's about the same time that I started to become that person in real life. Like when I was a kid, when I was in 4th grade, 5th grade, like that's who I was. And then I have another protector part. This was sort of the next one to come out. And I think this came out of just sort of the aggression that I grew up around. But that part of me is aggressive, and I call her Bruiser, or Brew for short. Now that we're like chill, she's no longer burdened. So like, I've done the work. Let me actually take a quick side trip. So the reason I'm able to talk about this and not feel triggered or ashamed is because I have done this work. I have done so much of this work with my therapist. My parts are completely comfortable with me sharing this information. It's like, I now have them in unburdened roles, and they show up in very helpful ways to me, because my exiles are no longer in boxes. They're under my wing as the self who leads my life in a calm, confident, connected, compassionate way, etc. my parts now trust me to lead the family. So that, know-it-all bitch is no longer a know-it-all bitch. She's the part of me that's really good at like learning and research and like intellectualizing things. She can show up in an unburdened way and in a valuable way in my life. Same with Bruiser, who is that aggressive part of me that like if I got too triggered, I would literally start to yell because that's what I grew up around. I would yell at you, call you out, like really want to like hit you. Like it was a lot of just like warrior kind of like go at it anger. And now that she's unburdened, she's the part of me that's confident and capable of setting boundaries in a healthy way. Like I will show up still in that very like, it is kind of a warrior way, but it's more of a healthy boundary. It's like, hey, don't speak to me like that. Like, it's not a like, what the fuck you bitch, like, just going off and like getting ratchet. Like it's less of that and it's more of the like healthy, confident, boundary setting version of me now that she's no longer a burdened part of me. But when I was a kid, those were the two protectors that came out first, I think. It was that like know-it-all and then like just aggression. Like I would totally be ready to start a fight on the playground. Like don't make me feel stupid, not enough, ashamed, like any of that. I'm gonna come for you. Like I would be ready to fight, you guys. And so that part of me, very angsty, very teen angst, I would see her as this like 13 to 14-year-old version of me. Okay, so then I'll take a little bit of a step back here. I don't just have the one exile. I don't just have little Leah that got put into a box. Eventually, as I grew up, I started to develop anxiety and I started to develop depression. And both of those things were things that were like, as a society, I think we tend to shame those things. I think it's getting better now. There's a lot of mental health awareness now, but there didn't used to be. It used to be that like if you were depressed, you'd get a lot of people saying like, oh, just cheer up, just smile, just put a smile on your face, everything's fine, like it's gonna be good. And it becomes something that you become ashamed of. You want to put that in a box. Anxiety, showing up as an anxious person, nobody wants to tolerate that. You start to feel like a burden, you put it in a box. So those became my two other exiles, the parts of me that while they did show up often, I wanted to put them in a box. And eventually, anger and know-it-all bullshit were not enough. And around the age of 13, I developed my next protector part. And that protector part is, well, I just call her Alice, but she's the part of me that's an addict. And it was always something that was told to me that like, oh, Leah, your biological father is an alcoholic. You have addictive tendencies. You could become an alcoholic as an adult, like blah, 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 blah. Eventually, I did have a part of me that showed up as an addict, and she showed up first, not as an addict to alcohol when I was 13, although I'm not gonna lie, you guys, I did have my first drink at the age of 14. It's a lot to take in. But she showed up first in the form of self-harm. And what's super interesting about that, so Dr. Richard Schwartz wrote a book. It's called No Bad Parts. I'm just gonna, No Bad Parts by Dr. Richard Schwartz. You guys, if any of this is resonating, or if by the end of the conversation you're feeling like, holy shit, I really want to know more about IFS, No Bad Parts by Dr. Richard Schwartz. It has a foreword by Alanis Morissette in the book. That book, that's going to just run you through all of this probably just way better than I can. I'm doing my best here because I've experienced this. This is something that I use regularly, but that book is the book that's like, he's the guy that came up with this. He wrote the book, get the book. And in that book, he talks about having a patient that was a self-harmer. Like she cut herself, and that's what I did as a kid. Granted, I stopped well before my 20s, and it just became instead, drinking, doing drugs, but that addict part never went away. So something like an addict is what's called a firefighter protector. Bruiser and Demi are more managers. They are like daily managers who are trying to prevent the exile and those triggers, like those emotional triggers. They're trying to prevent them from being felt at all costs by showing up with walls, trying to control everything, showing up in my daily life to manage not feeling the exile. But life doesn't work that way. You guys, you cannot outrun your pain. At some point, somebody is gonna piss you off, make you hurt, make you feel mad, sad, triggered, whatever, and that exile is gonna get, like someone's gonna come and scratch that exile, and those protectors are gonna rear their ugly heads, and it's not gonna be enough, and then those firefighters are gonna come out. Firefighters are the things like addiction. They show up in the form of alcoholism, sex addicts, gaming, like whatever pick your poison, whatever it is for you. If you find yourself doing that constantly, doom scrolling, sitting in front of Netflix for hours on end, going into a freeze state, those are your firefighters showing up. They're the people who come when the exile has been triggered and the managers have failed. The firefighters show up to make sure that your system feels all right. But at the end of the day, you usually end up in a freeze state, which is exactly what would happen to me. I would be super, super triggered by my job, for instance. Now we're talking about me as like an adult. I'd be super, super triggered at work. I would start to feel like I wasn't enough. I would start to feel that, remember we talked about I'm an Enneagram 4. So I'm an individualist. And so working a 9-to-5 job as like, I'm not shitting on anybody who's got a 9-to-5 job, but for me, that makes me feel kind of like a loser. And I'm like, that's not what that is at all. But inside, I get that feeling. And when that would get scratched, that emotional trigger would get scratched, it would be too much for me to handle because I hadn't dealt with any of that shit yet. So on my way home from work, I would find myself like flying through the drive-thru to get some fast food, stopping at the gas station to pick up a 6-pack, rolling a J when I got home. Like it was all of the things that I needed to numb and bury. And like I said, when I was 13, 14 years old, that started out with a cutting habit. So it was like a way to take me out of my body, but it wasn't like me that was showing up. It was a part of me that was showing up saying, I don't trust the self to handle this because the self isn't handling any of this. So I'm going to show up and do what I got to do to numb the outside so that the feelings aren't felt. And it started with physical pain on my physical body. And that's not, something at all to be proud of. It's not, I'm just sharing that is what it is. Like that's what I did as a teenager. Would try to hide it with long sleeves, would try to hide it with bracelets. I was like the emo kid. So I had all those like rubbery bracelets, like you just stack them on your wrist, like so that people wouldn't see what you're doing. And my parents had no idea. And then one of the most like triggering things for me was like if somebody were to see that, then I would feel like super, super shameful. Like, oh God, like I have this thing going on and it's like, I know it's not appropriate. And that's where you don't see it happening in real time, but in hindsight, you see parts interacting with one another. So like now the addict is like shameful, like, ooh. But so, you've got another part that's looking at the addict like, I can't believe you did that to her. That's like a shameful thing. So that's how like parts begin to like interact with one another. There are 3 ways. Typically, Dr. Richard Schwartz talks about protective. Obviously, you have protector parts. So the protectors are trying to protect the exiles, typically. And then sometimes you've got protectors trying to protect one another. Like that I experienced a little bit when I started doing some of that meditative work. And then you have polarization where, addict doesn't like academic doesn't like addict. Like they don't like each other. They have completely different end goals. And then you have like alliance characters. So Bruiser and Demi had the same sort of goal, which was to protect little Leah. And so they have like an alliance with one another. So when I started doing this meditative work, when I was working with my therapist, I would literally like close my eyes, go into a meditative space, imagine, like personify these parts of myself and imagine having conversations with them. And at first I had those 2 and me in like a hippie van, and little Leah was in the back. And they were like, no, we're not going to let you talk to her. You have just not shown up your whole life. How can we trust you to talk to her? You're just going to hurt her again. And it was like me showing up as the self saying like, no, I'm not. I'm here now. I'm here to heal all of you. I'm here to do the work. Please trust me. We can do this. And it took like several meditative conversations with my like internal self and with my internal parts to have those parts separate from me and unburden and say like, okay, I'll give you a chance, but if you fuck up, I'm coming for you, right? Like, I'm just gonna show back up. So it was like a lot of going in. And then I remember having like a meditative experience, and I wept, where those two parts finally gave me the space to engage with little Leah. And in my mind's eye, I could visualize me as an adult and me as a child, and that child saying to me like, why have you abandoned me for so long? Like, why have you left me here? I thought, you know, we were the same person and you don't like me. And it was just like, oh my God, like to have that happening sort of inside of you in your mind's eye, it was so powerful. And I just like wept for her. And when I finally started to say, okay, you can sit in the passenger seat with me. Again, we're in this hippie van. So it's like me as the self in the driver's seat. Now I've got little Leah in the passenger seat, and Demi and Brew hang out in the back. So then, you know, I started to do a little bit deeper work. I discovered that I have that addict part as an adult. Like I said, she showed up as drinking, she showed up as drug use. And it was like a lot of, again, doom scrolling. I would sit and watch something on Netflix. My MO is picking a show or a movie that I've seen a million times and just letting it play while I scroll through my phone. Like, that's my MO for like going into a freeze state, just completely shutting down. And that's what I would do. So that too is a part of that addict. So then as I did deeper work with my therapist, I discovered that like addict was not just one part. She had those sub parts. There was like the stoner part of her that just wanted to like smoke it all away. Again, it was a numbing agent. Like anytime I would get triggered, it was that numbing, that like, I just want to go away from this. I have to get out of my body. This is too much to feel. And then I have other sort of like firefighter parts that show up with like I said, I like shopping, but it's like, it has been a problem for me in the past. It's something I had to learn to develop a healthy relationship with. And that came from like learning to manage money and like dealing with that part specifically. So you can do meditative work with a specific part. And like something that would happen a lot is like, I would go into my mind's eye, we'd start to do a meditation, and I would want to speak like directly to like that shopper part of me. And another part would kind of come in like, no, like, and you would have to kind of ask that part to step aside. Can I please just have a conversation with this part? And that's how you start to, as the self, heal those individual parts of yourself and show up for yourself as yourself and get those parts out of their burdened roles in your life. Because if you find yourself showing up angry, popping off at people, maybe you're even physically violent, that's even worse. Or if you find yourself, like if you're questioning like, damn, do I actually drink too much? And why do I like to get drunk so much? It's like, start asking yourself, like, is that just a part of me that's showing up as a protector for some exiled version of myself that has experienced trauma that I've put into a box and said like, I'm not gonna go there. And then when you start to work with those protectors, that's what we would do first. Like as like someone who's done the IFS therapy, I'll say this, and Dr. Richard Schwartz says this in his book, it's like you want to work with those protectors first, whether they're managers or firefighters, work with them first, because you have to kind of get their permission to get to the exile. Because if you try to just jump to doing inner child work where it's like that exiled child, you're typically going to find yourself getting triggered, and then those protectors are just going to show up. And if you think I sound crazy, because Dr. Richard Schwartz even says this in the beginning of his book, that it looks and sounds a little bit like multiple personality, but the differentiation is that multiple personality disorder is a psychosis. Like, but somebody who's doing IFS therapy recognizes that like they are not these parts of themselves, right? Like you're yourself, but you do recognize that sometimes if you've ever found yourself saying, for instance, like, you know, a part of me wants to do this, but a part of me is thinking this, that's internal family system. Identify what those parts are. A really nice way to do this somatically, and my therapist would have me do this, would be like to touch the part, like find it in your body, like meditatively find it in your body. Maybe it's like in your back, maybe it's in your arms or your shoulders. Find it, touch it, give it a color, give it a sound, give it a feeling. Like, what does it feel like? What does it sound like? I am an incredibly imaginative person. So I have kind of like personified all of my parts. Like I said, I've given them names. I have like a visual of them in my mind's eye. Like I said, some of them are me at 16, me at 15, me at 7, like whatever. My Exiles, for instance, anxiety is me around the age of 8 or 9. She's got like 2 really long braids and she is kind of orange, jittery in nature. And that's kind of like how I know when I feel her. I feel her typically in my chest. That anxiety shows up here. So if I want to work with that, I like find that in my chest. I might do a tap, breathe into that, and then close my eyes and quite literally meditate with that part of me and ask, honey, what do you need? I'm showing up as myself and I'm saying, what do you need? How can I help? And typically that anxious part of me wants certainty. She's looking for like the right answer. Like a lot of those are the things that make me feel uncertain, or if I feel out of control. And then I have to sit there as the adult self and say, you know, we can only control ourselves. Like, you know, we can't control other people. It's just us, and everything's going to be okay. And if you need to move, okay, let's go for a walk. If you need to listen to some music, okay, let's turn some music on. Like whatever it is, I find the healthy way to give that part of me what it needs. And then for instance, like my depression, that was one that was really, really hard for me to access. I had a lot of meditative moments with my addict part where she really didn't want me to get to that depressed part. And when I finally did, I visualized that depressed part of me as like maybe like 14-year-old me. She's gray. She looks disheveled as fuck. Like she is just despondent. Like that is the part of me that needed the most love and care. That was the part of me that felt like I am not enough. I will never be enough. I am not worthy of anything. I am complete shit. And that was the part of me that needed the most love. So of course that was the part of me that my protectors were like, you are not going here. I don't trust you to go here. And it took forever. Like seriously, like fucking 5 or 6 therapy sessions. And it's like your therapy sessions are only once a week. So we're talking weeks for me to get to that part of myself and heal through that and learn like what that part of myself needs to feel better. And a lot of it was showing up as myself, putting on cute outfits and makeup and like deciding like I'm going to show up for myself because I am worthy of showing up for myself. And I think for the longest time I didn't think that I was. And I wouldn't show up and put on an outfit. I was kind of like, oh, that made me uncomfortable. It made me feel like I was too much to be loud. How many times has somebody in my life said to me, shh, you're being really loud, like bring it down. Fuck you. Like, I don't care. Okay. I'm a loud person. My voice naturally echoes out. Like I'm a loud person. And I got to a point where that was a part of me that I was like, oh, I gotta put her in a box. I just gotta shut that part of me away. And it would be so triggering for me if somebody was like, you're being so fucking loud right now. I'd be like, oh, am I being loud? Like, it was just that I had to learn to be like, I understand like now, you know, okay, there's a time and a place for an inside voice. Like I'm not going to yell in a restaurant, but if I am being a little loud, I don't care. Like if you feel like I'm being loud and I'm just too much for you, then you're not my people. Okay. Like if I'm too much for you, fine. I'm too much for you, but I'm not too much for me. I'm a little bit freaking extra. Okay. I like to be extra. I like my sparkles. I like my nails done. I like to have long, freaking fluffy curly hair. And those were things that I hated about myself as a kid because other people told me that those things about me were not okay. And I had to learn as an adult to go inward, validate myself, let those parts unburden, find that exiled inner child of mine that loves to paint and dance and sing and be loud and be glittery and just let her show the fuck up without worrying about the opinions of others. Another one of my manager parts was a perfectionist, like someone who would be like, okay, the people around me look like this, so I need to show up looking like that. And it's funny because when you do that, when you show up inauthentically in that way, everyone can fucking smell that shit from a mile away. Like when I was in high school, a lot of my friends called me a poser, and in hindsight, they weren't really my friends. But like, I was though. Like I was a poser because I just wanted to fit in. I didn't want, it's like you think like, okay, I want to belong, but it's like, no, really, I just wanted to fit in. So I showed up as whoever I needed to fucking show up as to fit in, but that's so inauthentic. And when you're dripping with that inauthenticity, it reeks. Like everyone can suss that out. It's like, okay, like what's up with this chick? Accept yourself. IFS is all about accepting yourself. That's why the book is called No Bad Parts. There are no bad parts. even my addict, even that part of me that wants to pick up a drink and like drown smoking weed, or like go in front of the TV and numb out, like whatever that addiction wants to show up as, that part of me is not a bad part of me, because she just wanted to keep me safe. That part just wanted to make little Leah feel okay, safe, loved, enough. And when it was too much, she was like, I'm going to do this the only way that I know how, and drown us out in unhealthy ways. And you have to learn to accept that, like, okay, that's a part of me. Part of my whole journey then became getting sober. And that was like a hard thing, you guys. Like, if you're hearing this and you're thinking about that, getting sober, so I keep like scratching my nose. It's bothering me because I'm doing it and I keep seeing myself doing it like I have an itch. But anyway, if you're thinking about something like that, like a journey to getting sober, it's hard because I've talked about this in a conversation before. You have to be willing to let that version of you die. The version of you that is a drinker, that part of you is going to feel, it's going to want to resist. That addict part is going to want to resist you so hard. Like, what? Why are you trying to shove me into a corner? I had to have that conversation with that part of myself that was like, it's not about shoving you into a corner. I will listen to you moving forward. And when you sort of rear your ugly head, I want to hear what you have to say. But I'm telling you as the self that it's unhealthy for our body to drink that much alcohol, to drown that much, like to do these really unhealthy things. And we have to find another way to reach the same goal. So it was a matter of getting my addict to trust the self, to trust me, to lead the family, the internal family, the exiles, to take care of them. So now, in terms of daily mitigation or like a daily practice, like I said, this is a very meditative practice. I will sit down and do a meditation, like, sit down, hands up, eyes closed, deep breath. I go to a place in my mind that kind of looks like a hobbit hole with a big tree and a nice garden and a beautiful like flowing river. And when I step inside, it's warm, it's loving. My dog is there, my parts are there, all of them. And we sit now at this sort of like table in like a kitchen. This is just all in my imagination, you guys. Again, like I said, I'm so imaginative. So this is what I've built for myself in my mind. And I imagine like, okay, I've got little Leah here, depression is here, anxiety is here, perfectionist is here. I have another part that's like a controller part. She's sitting at this part of the table. Bruiser and Demi sit here. And then the addict actually and her little fellows sit at a table isolated from the rest of us, but they're still kind of part of the conversation. I just leave them over there. They like to be at the table by themselves. They have their own little table, like Mean Girls. And I will meditatively go around the table and say, like, what does everybody need? Does anybody have anything they want to say? Like, based on what's going on in my life, how are all of my different parts feeling? And then as the self, I can say like, oh, okay, you're feeling like you really want to get some aggression out this week. All right, let's do that in this healthy way. You're feeling like you want to do something creative. Let's do that in this healthy way. Like, oh, you feel like we were insulted and you want to place a boundary. Okay, I'll have a conversation with that person this week. Showing up for myself as an adult, that confident, calm center of love within myself. I can now, having done all of this work, lead the family from a place of self. And sometimes I will still see those parts show up. Like I'll get triggered by something, especially if like, for instance, somebody makes me feel like I'm just being too much. Again, like I try to not let that get to me, but every now and then it will. It'll just like itch, scratch an itch of like, you're too much, because it's something that I heard a lot when I was a kid, that I'm too much, that I'm too loud, like, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to have, that part will kind of come in. Usually it's Bruiser, like she wants to do something angry. She wants to yell at that person. And I kind of like feel that. Usually I feel that in this shoulder. That's kind of where that part of me lives. So I kind of give myself a little hug. And I'm like, okay, I feel what you're feeling. You tell me what we're thinking. All right, I'll find a healthy way to deal with it, like as the self. And it's interesting now to be so like cognizant of what's going on in me that like I can say, oh, that triggered this part of me. This part of me is the part that wants to show up and deal with it. But I, as the self, am going to do this instead because it's what's healthy and it's what's right and it's what's best for all of us, like all of the parts in the system. And it is just the most fascinating tool I have ever encountered. I have tried cognitive behavioral therapy, you guys. I've tried all kinds of stuff. But internal family systems is the thing that took me from being ruled by my triggers and my trauma to having control over my triggers and my trauma. And I don't even want to say control, because it's like I do have a part of me that's a controller that wants to show up. Again, I'm super Virgo. I want to show up with my spreadsheets and my lists and my plans and have everything go perfectly, but that is just not reality. So I have to recognize and go with the flow when shit starts like going off the rails and be like, okay, this is what it is. But I think that also comes from, for me, a super deep place of faith where I recognize that if something doesn't go my way, or even if something bad happens to me, I think that typical line that like rejection is God's protection. Like, I'm just like, okay, this is happening for a reason. And maybe some of you don't believe that, but I have had to like internalize that and learn to believe that. And it's like, that has helped me get through a lot of shit. Because all the time, I'll be triggered by the fact that I can't control something. Like, being out of control and feeling out of control comes from childhood. And when I'm triggered into that as an adult, which is a lot, because like, let's face it, traffic is like something that's out of your control. But if you're triggered constantly by shit like that, and you are sick of feeling like you are triggered by shit like that, that's when you want to sit down and do that internal work, something like internal family systems, start to work with a therapist, find support. That's why I've created Full Circle Wellness, because I want to have this community and have these conversations like we're having here to hopefully be of support to someone else who is where I was and they're at the beginning of their journey, and say like, honey, you got this, like, keep going, you can do this. It's going to take time. It's hard. It's so hard. It's emotionally and mentally and physically exhausting to do that kind of work internally, but it is so worth it. It is so worth it. Like, you don't want to live a life where you are sort of at the whim of a protector part that wants to yell at people and start shit with people that you love just because somebody made you feel a little bit triggered. You know what I mean? Or a lot of it triggered. You know, it just depends on what it is. Like, and this kind of stuff can work for someone who has experienced, again, like some of the big T trauma. Maybe you've got PTSD as like a vet, or maybe you have something like, you had something super violent happen to you, like abuse, or it was like an attack, or it was rape, or something really serious. Or it was chronic, like just growing up in a home where there was a lot of arguing or like violence or something like that. Going inside and finding that little version of you that didn't feel safe, and finding ways to be your own source of safety. That is so crucial, to know how to make yourself feel safe. And sometimes, guys, there was a meditation, I want to say it was Mel Robbins, and it's a super simple, or maybe it was Gabby Bernstein, I'm forgetting. It's a super simple method of just like doing a heart hold, where you put your left hand on your heart, your right hand on your belly, and you take deep breaths, and you just repeat to yourself, like, I am safe, I am loved, I am okay. And you do that until the feeling goes away. Like, it can be as simple as that. Another tool for anxiety that I've used is that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 tool. I think I've maybe shared about this. I know it's kind of like all over the internet, but it's like, if you are really having an anxiety attack, just getting still and identifying 5 things around you that you can see. I think it's 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can smell, 2 that you can touch, and 1 that you can taste. But it's like getting back into your body, getting back into your senses. And a lot of that, especially with anxiety, a lot of what you need is just like learning how to regulate your nervous system. Like, your nervous system should be at about a 5. So typically if you're dysregulated and you're upregulated, you're at like a 10, that's anxiety. Or if you're like way down regulated, you're in a freeze state, you're down at like a low. And it's funny because like, if you're in a freeze state, typically you need to upregulate, right? Like, so if you're down, you need to upregulate. And when you're in a freeze state, you do not want to do upregulating things. Like, you don't want to like talk to people. You don't want to go for a walk. You want to shut down. But what you need is something that's going to get you moving. Something like exercise, something like talking to somebody. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in a freeze state and Greg has like come upstairs and just been like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, what do you need? And I'll finally just like let that crack open and just spill out what I'm thinking. Like, whatever it is, I'll just like run a conversation on it for like 5 minutes and then immediately feel better because I've upregulated. Like, I've engaged in conversation. I'm upregulating from like where I am. And it's like, you don't want to do that. It doesn't feel instinctive because you're shutting down, but what you need is to talk or move or like engage with people. And it's like learning about all this stuff, guys, that's a whole other conversation. Like nervous system regulation is a whole other conversation, and it's powerful shit, you guys. Just to like tap into yourself like that and have a deep understanding of who you are and your parts and what you need. Because when you can show up as self, that's how you learn to communicate what you need. That's how you learn how to set boundaries from a place of confidence. That's also how you learn how to have compassion for other people. I can't tell you how long I spent feeling resentful and hateful and angry of people around me who were more confident than I was, or doing better than I was, or I viewed them as like somebody that I could blame for my problems. To be able to sort of like see them with new eyes and see them with compassion and not pass judgment and just say like, oh my God, like they're just like me. We're all one. We're all made of the same stuff. They might be having a bad day too. Like, I don't know how they're showing up. You know what I mean? It's a lot of that. It's a lot of just like learning how to be yourself, how to take care of yourself, how to show up for yourself, and like do what you need, express your needs to other people. And that's it. That is our conversation tonight, guys. I am so glad that you could sit here and listen to me talk about this. I have wanted to do a conversation on IFS for so long. Again, if you want to do like a super deep dive and you want it straight from the mouth of the guy that like came up with this whole modality of therapy, this like psychological tool, again, Dr. Richard Schwartz. The book is called No Bad Parts. I will totally write that in the show notes, and I'll share it in the show notes. And then also, if you are looking for a community, if you're looking for support, in the description in the show notes, I will link out the Facebook group, the Full Circle Wellness Facebook group. Please join us every week. I'm sharing this video, I'm sharing the blog post, I'm sharing a ton of information about whatever the topic for the week is. Again, this week we're going to do some quizzes and we're going to dive into some funness on like learning about ourselves. And I even wore my Virgo necklace tonight, you guys. I was like, okay, just gonna be like a little Virgo tonight to show up with that. Have my little Harry Potter guy in the corner, but I'll put that in the show notes. And then I don't know if you've heard me talk about this, or if you're following me on social, or if you're in the group, but I actually created a guide. It's called The Complete Guide to Mastering Your Mindset. And I talked about it pretty heavily in the pilot of the video podcast here, but it's a sort of walkthrough journal situation. It's a PDF. You can do like a printout, or you can fill it in online, whatever you want to do, or you can just kind of like look through it, go through your journal. But if that sounds like something that would be of interest to you, because I think when it comes to doing work like this, you really have to be in the right mindset. You have to be in the mindset of like, okay, I'm capable of growing in this way. The mindset of like believing in yourself, the mindset of like settling into the process, the time that it takes to do this kind of work, and then settling into the idea that like you are capable of getting unstuck. Like getting into that mindset is all like the head of the internal work. Like it's like the foundation of the foundation of the foundation, like the foundation of even doing like the mental health work. So if that's something that's of interest to you, I put together a complete guide on mastering your mindset, getting into that headspace, and it's got like tons of journal prompts and stuff that you can go through. I will link that out in the description and share that with you guys. So if you want to check it out, definitely check that out. Again, I'm just scratching my nose, guys. It's killing me. One of these days, I'm going to figure out how to do the edits on these videos, so maybe you don't have to watch me scratch my nose the whole time because I'm itchy. I have a lot of allergies, you guys. It is what it is. But either way, thank you for being here tonight, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next week. And yeah, join the group. And if you dug this, give me a like, please like it, and maybe subscribe to the channel, because I'll be back once a week with more episodes and more big conversations on all of the goodness and all of the stuff that I care about and all the stuff that I just really want to share with you guys, like internal family systems. So I'll be back next week. Stick around, and until then, I love you guys. Be well.